afternoon. We're kind of changing the scale here from pollen grains right up to the whole country and all the rivers in the country. But yeah, I really do think we need, as people who are involved with invasives, to start thinking very hard about what's happening to our river system. Right, just in the outline, just obviously an introduction, and then I'm going to talk something about riparian environments, so you get a bit of understanding how river systems work, which is something I'm learning as well. Talk about riparian ecosystems, and then discuss the invasions as we have data on them at the moment, and then come to a summary and some conclusions. Last year I reported on the impacts on water flows, so I'm not going to be discussing that this year. Apparently the video is on the internet. I haven't looked. I don't like looking at myself talking. And then I've also stressed the uncertainty of the impact of riparian reductions. If we adjusted the percentages of riparian reductions, I was getting to what I would regard as more realistic percentages. I could increase the total flow reductions by about a third in the country. But obviously we don't have solid data to base that on, it's just calculations. But it does indicate that there's considerable uncertainty. Our riparian systems are key conveyors of water. They're heavily used and hardworking. Anyone who tracks the news about what our wastewater treatment works are doing, what our acid mine drainage is doing, will understand that our river systems are not in a good state. The impacts of invasions are well understood, but we don't really have a good picture of what's going in our rivers. And where only 8% of the land yields 50% of the river flows, which is an analysis we reported on last year. It's out in a report by WWF. And these are our strategic water source areas, so they're one of the areas that we need to focus on in terms of riparian invasions. Riverine environments, often when we look at a landscape, we tend to see a river and we tend to see the land, and we don't think that there's much connection between them. And if we look at a very brief history of riverine environments, one of the early changes in thinking about rivers was to start thinking about them as these longitudinal systems. So we had people like Van Oort who came up with the idea that your river develops as it goes down a gradient. It changes the nature of the river from the headwaters or the source to the ocean. It changes. So we have a longitudinal dimension. Then people began to think about rivers as two-dimensional systems, where you have the longitudinal dimension and you also have a lateral dimension. So that river is connected to the landscapes on either side in various ways. And more recently, people have started to think about rivers in all these different dimensions, as well as the temporal dimension of changing the flow. So you also have a vertical dimension where there's exchange between the surface water and the water in the riverbed. And this is very important because it's a very important part of the ability of a river to absorb chemicals and pollutants actually goes on in what there is called the hyporheic zone, just below the surface zone. Our riverine environments also generate a huge variety of ecosystem services, and the kinds and mixes of ecosystem services they generate vary with what kind of river you're looking at. So they do things like regulating sediment movements, retarding flood flows and absorbing flood energy. They do nutrient assimilation and flushing. They degrade chemicals in there. They work like wastewater treatment works in effect. They regulate harmful algae and microbes. They provide us with water, obviously, food, fiber and medicines, especially for rural populations. They provide a habitat for biodiversity, and the basis of many terrestrial networks is actually food that comes out of the river system. So insects that live in the river system spread out to the landscape around and become the basis of a food chain to the terrestrial environment. And then obviously they also have recreation and amenity value. Anybody who wants to buy a property with a river frontage will know it costs a hell of a lot more. So there's an example of a service with cattle grazing in a river and feeding and drinking the water. This is discharge from a wastewater treatment works, in this case not too bad, fortunately. And there is water also being collected from a river to be delivered to the surrounding settlements. The houses look nice, but most of them don't actually have a tap in them. They depend on water delivered to them. One characteristic feature of our riparian invasions is that many of the major invaders, such as eucalypts, which came out as much more invasive than we had thought before, and Acacia mearnsii, are conflict of interest species. Even salix has become a conflict of interest species, which I'll touch on